So, Carrot is considered one of the worst decks out of OP8. Similar to the anime, Carrot does nothing outside of looking cute. Resting a 5 cost or lower is strong, but lacks a ton of utility during the late game. 90% of minks are unplayable, really just being bulk in every set since OP1. Resting and freezing units as a whole is kind of weak mechanically, and for some reason, this is all everyone talking about the deck seems to focus on. Their build being optimized to make suboptimal plays over and over again. So I decided to instead focus on what Carrot is actually good at. Then I played 88 ranked games and several local events in order to refine and craft the best deck possible. I've learned specific counters to every relevant matchup. Let's start by laying out the actual applications of Carrot Leader skill. By resting a 5 cost or less, we open up several options. First, we can swing into board and start ripping cards from the opponent's hand. This is great against aggro decks like Zoro and Kalgara, but it's absurdly strong against Black-Yellow Luffy, where they need as many cards in hand as possible and rely on board for setups. It's a hard denial of the cards in their opponent's life. Carrot skill really just puts you in control of the flow of an opponent's cards in those early turns. Second, Carrot lets us set up for a freeze effect. It is very mid, but it's a next logical step. Lastly, Carrot lets us rest a blocker and swing for game. It is easy applications against every deck, since an opponent has to set up 2 blockers to stop an attack. But outside of that, Carrot effect is usually kind of worthless late game. Since, like most green decks, Carrot has no value, we need to be insanely in control of our opponent's tempo. We have 3 5-drops that put us in control: Bonnie, Carrot, and Inuyasha. Bonnie is probably the most important, since it lets us control an opponent's curve. Of course, it's an extra stun option against our opponent's top end, when we can't easily stall otherwise. But really, we want to leverage Bonnie against every deck by smartly choosing turn order. Against Black, we're going to want to go first to delay a Gecko Moria or an Isho. Against Enel, we need to go second, to deny access to a Yamato at 9 Dawn. Leader skill will let us remove any unit to block a decent Katakuri as well. We get an absurd amount of value for this, thanks to our passive engines. Carrot is a stall option that's a simple 1-for-1 value trade. If we would be even against an opponent, Carrot goes even and then keeps getting value later on. If an opponent guards a rested unit, you can just freeze it with Carrot. But how good this is really depends on if it sticks. Against decks like Lucci, you can't depend on this card being usable. Funnily enough, Carrot really is better in Bonnie, and Bonnie is better in Carrot. Inuyasha is a brutal anti-aggro option. Against Zoro or Kalgara, it just wins games. They don't get to play at all. But Inuyasha has the same problems as Carrot Leader skill. It's not good late game, and it's not good against decks that like going to late game. So, taking all this into account, you need to shift your ratios of these 3 cards for the changing meta. During set 8, Bonnie is better against the top end meta, but during set 9, Inuyasha is better against the swarm like Doflamingo. Now, here's the best card in Minks, Zo. Zo does 2 things. First, it's an extra Dawn each and every turn. Second, it lets us freely restand a Mink at the end of turn. This is batshit insane strong. At its surface, it gives a free swing with units like Pedro, and protects valuable attackers like Carrot. But if we take that extra Dawn and put it towards an engine that can net us value, we can outmaneuver an opponent at every turn. And that's where the You Can Be My Samurai engine comes in. For 1 Dawn and by resting 2 units, we get to draw 2 cards. Zo provides a 1 free Unrest and 1 free Dawn. And the other half of units we rest can come from Otama and Momonosuke. They're searchers for You Can Be My Samurai and extra 2k counters. Weaving this into your regular plays nets you extra cards each and every turn, and it moves your opponent's focus away from your life and into these tiny worthless units. But it gets even better. Now imagine using You Can Be My Samurai on the same turn as dropping a Doflamingo 10-drop. As I said, batshit insane value. Zo can also get us a 12 Dawn a turn thanks to Milky. Zo both restands the Milky and a Dawn. So, if you're good enough, you can outplay anything an opponent can do, because you just have more than they do. Side note, I really hate how this card is named Milky. I love losing a game and then getting to complain how I didn't see Milky. Now, let's finish our games with our top end. Of course, since we need the combo with our resting and general stall game plan, we have 10-drop Doflamingo. It's an easy thing to just spam drop these out until we have enough big bodies to swing for game. It is a hard required 4 of. Now, here's a bit of a divide between the two sets. 8-drop Rosinante is ran in OP8, and 9-drop Shanks is ran post the new starter decks. Rosinante is simple board swarming that synergizes with our 5-drops. He also does give some protection against black matchups. It's okay, but honestly it's nothing to write home about in most situations. The 9-drop Shanks lets us remove one anything once it's rested. This card solves some of our toughest matchups, like Charlotte Pudding, by being both a backup to 10-drop Dolphy, but also a direct answer to cards like 10-drop Shanks, turn skip Luffy, and of course, Purple Rush Luffy. Something worth noting is while I'm not running it in my build, Shanks has very amazing synergy with Garchu. Garchu rest 1 Mink to rest 1 anything from our opponent, thus letting Shanks be immediately relevant. It's very strong, but it's a 2-card combo that's only relevant late game and requires some setup. Only consider this if your local meta is really scuffed. Usually they're just going to throw a rush unit at you anyway, and which Shanks is more equipped to deal with. It also really fixes your curve. Shanks being a 9 cost lets you go first and it just works. Now, here's our 2 blockers, Pedro and Bartolomeo. Bartolomeo lets us filter hand with an absurdly easy effect to trigger. It works from leader skill, Momonosuke, You Can Be My Samurai, and even Rosinante. This filtering is important because you'll often have to get both dead copies of Zo and You Can Be My Samurai out of your hand. Zo is unfortunately just a bricky card, having no benefits to seeing multiples, no trigger effects, and no counter. So we need to hard build in options for getting it out of our hand. Pedro is a bit more odd. He's absurdly strong at countering aggro decks, and he's even better at punishing players who can't read. Against decks with a heavy curve, it forces them to attack last. It also forces an opponent to lose any early game and mid game unit if they would attack you. It's a massive slowdown to an opponent, albeit it is a slowdown mostly on the opponent's terms. Pedro is honestly mostly used as an additional trigger for Carrot Leader skill, as well as a good target for Zill effect. So let's look at the game data I've acquired. I'd show you the screenshot, but it got reset and got frozen on these numbers. Luckily, I've been recording the data on my own end. Ranked-wise, we come out to a 53.4% win rate, which is very good for a deck that's considered to be extremely bad. Plus, for my locals, I have 1 win and 1 X1. These are small events, but they're very helpful for verifying what I learned online. The matchups are what you'd expect. We are really good against aggro decks, and specifically Black-Yellow Luffy. But we have an extremely frustrating time dealing with the other Gecko Moria Turbo decks. Consider the spread of matchups more so a rough guide as opposed to a hard rule. The data is good, but not large enough to make those calls. If you want to see some of these games, I have a stream recording of my first 30 or so on my second channel. Before I start explaining how to play against each specific matchup, I want to talk about this deck's consistency. It's not bad, but you are gambling primarily on 3 things: seeing stage, seeing Doflamingo, and not whiffing a search more than twice. And this is the funniest part of my data, because I was roughly tracking these factors through an incredibly vague 6 stat called luck. If 2 or 3 of these factors fell through the game, it was most likely placed in the weak luck. Of course, extraordinary circumstances could move that, like an opponent making an absurdly stupid misplay, but in general they'd go here. All 3 factors going off would put this game into strong luck, and things in between go in the middle. Strong games have a 90% win rate, mid games have a 50% win rate, and weak games have a 0% win rate. Since the odds of strong luck are about 50%, with mid and weak being 25%. We get to force out a positive win rate. This right here is why my deck is built the way it is. I have reduced this game to luck and optimized my odds. Speaking of which, let's talk about the odds of each of those 3 factors. The odds of seeing stage are very straightforward. On your own, with just natural draws, mulligans, and taking 2 life, it's about a 60 to 70% chance to see it turn 3, which is our last turn to get value for playing it. For each subsequent You Can Be My Samurai draw resolution, you bump up those odds by about 5%. usually more so because you're thinning out your deck with searches and stacking top end. It's a similar situation with Dolphy, but we have more time and usually we want more than one. Now, the odds of whiffing a search are a bit more varied. Our weakest searcher, Otama, is roughly a 75% chance to hit at peak, and closer to 50% chance when we're thinner. Wanda and Momo have a higher 80 to 60% chance. For a better competitive deck, this straight up isn't acceptable. You'll need to play at least 8 to 10 rounds in a row. However, given the weaker state of Carrot, we're going to have to take the gamble and win on those more likely than not high-rolling games. There are two things I built into this deck to round out a few of those whiffs. First, the deck is designed to be okay with whiffing a single search. One card doesn't matter when you have so many searches, and you could be my samurai to make up for card advantage. Second, you should never whiff a search late game, because you should know what cards are in your deck and in what order, because you're just gonna be doing that many searches. It'll take about 7 searches to fully cycle through your deck, and usually a lot less when you're drawing as many cards as Carrot is. There are games I won by putting Dolphys on the top of a search, and then knowing when I'd be able to draw into them with a You Can Be My Samurai, and with Stage I can play it in the same turn. If you want to maximize your odds and what you can pull off in a game, I recommend learning the skill of how to do full deck cycling. You can practice by playing casual games where you put your first search face up to keep it in mind, or just get good at counting. If not, you can generally make your odds better by knowing when you can't resolve a search late game. Of course, all this luck maxing only works if you have the skills and knowledge to follow through. That's where my matchups come into play. One last thing to mention because it was interesting, this deck has a 64% win rate going second and a 54% win rate going first. Mostly because I tend to use going second as a counter pick against certain decks. Black Yellow Luffy is a very free matchup for Carrot. Because your deck can counter Luffy's two biggest advantages, it isn't punished by the type of gameplay the Luffy matchup necessitates. Our first goal when playing against Black Yellow Luffy is to deny them as many cards in hand as possible. We get to develop our board while swinging into theirs. Playing a Kuzan against Carrot is not an investment, it is a liability that they have to throw away a bunch of cards in hand to keep it alive. And if they go low enough in hand, they just die thanks to our leader skill. Our main benefit early game, we get to fully commit to the You Can Be My Samurai package for value. We're starving them, but we're not losing tempo for it, because we never had anything to lose in the first place. If you leave them at an awkward number like 2 to 3 life, they can't go off without losing massively in hand, at least not without high rolling you with Flampeys. But it's still less 2k counters to have to deal with and keep track of. Carrot also gets to deny any utility the 5 drops would normally have. Egghead Luffy only KOs a 4 cost or less, Sabo only protects from KOs and not resting, and Lifeburn Luffy is both not fast enough to solve their life starve issues, nor does it get to attack, thanks to all of our 5-drop stun units. Late game, we get to throw out a Doflamingo who counters their Gecko Moria and leader swings, plus it gets to take cheap shots at their 9k leader for free. Gets a bit better with Shanks. Also note about this matchup that you can and should use Jewelry Bonnie to deny Gecko Moria plays by freezing an opponent's Dawn. If you can't 10-drop, they shouldn't be allowed to play either. All in all, it's just a brutal matchup for Luffy. And it has done wonders for padding my win rate. Because our next matchup has definitely done terrors for it. Lucci and Starter Deck 14 Luffy are our deck's 2 biggest problems. Well, only really Gecko Moria, who is our biggest problem. You see, if Gecko Moria goes off, it takes a combined usage of Carrot Leader Skill, 10-drop Doflamingo, and some remaining board presence, like from before he drops it, to deal with that immense swing in tempo. You really only get to deal with one of the 4 drops it generates each turns. It's slightly better against Luffy who can't generate as much, but it's just brutal. Not to mention, every black deck has removal to counter our early game and break our engines. Rob Lucci is a 2-for-1 beater that removes the entirety of the Wano engine and keeps our leader skill not live at the start of turn. So you're going to have to be very cautious about throwing out stuff ahead of the opponent. Look for minor openings, missed curves, and any chip damage possible. It sucks because I'm going to have to be honest. Your win con against Rob Lucci is seeing multiple Doflamingos and trying not to die until then. You do have Rosinante to slow down a removal turn, and more importantly, you have Bonnie to deny a Gecko Moria turn. But it's really not enough, and you're only kind of delaying the inevitable. But it is at least something, and you can high roll out of it. My plan for dealing with Enel is kind of insane. We're gonna go second, then play to flood the board, and play for board control early game. Spend time even clearing little units with leader skill. We're gonna carefully set our opponent to 1 life. Then before their 9-drop turn, we're gonna use Bonnie to lock them to 8 Dawn. If you do this right, they can't Yamato, Ace, or even get decent value from a Katakuri. Then we can get in some big swings at life and rip cards from the opponent's hand. If you're not confident swinging out, you can do the threat of starting with a no committal swing to first guard early anyway. It's brutal. Of course, if that doesn't work, we have Dolphy. The 3 best aggro decks all kind of lose to our deck by default. Zoro can't stick a chopper to the board and certainly can't ever swing with it. Kalgara loses to a single carrot drop. Dolphy is a mixed bag, but any board spam early is kind of ineffective. All these decks tend to lose any purpose when met with an Inurashi. Dolphy is the most important one, because while you do win early game, you completely run out of steam late game, since as of OP8 they spam Gravity Blades and 6-drop Boa Hancocks, which counters your Dolphy and your Wano engine. So you're just trying to get ahead enough early to push through a quick win. They're better off the top deck than you, so you're gonna have to be careful. Charlotte Pudding and Katakuri are tough matchups and theoretically should be your worst. I've been getting lucky by repeatedly punishing the deck's lack of early life and weak early game pressure to chip cards in hand and win games on massive board swings. Dolphy is again your friend here. Either way, you're gonna have to be a bit ballsy at times until you narrow down that hand. Same with Katakuri. You just really want stage more than usual when you're going against Kata. Alright, I think I've gone on long enough about Carrot, and that's all I got for today. I've quite enjoyed optimizing and playing this unpopular deck. I think I've gotten it to do quite a bit more than just looking cute. If you want to see more deck profiles like this, let me know by subscribing and liking this video. I try to go as in-depth on these as possible, so I hope you've appreciated the work. Next up for deck profiles will probably be OP9 format Red Uta and OP9 format Doflamingo. A classic MonkeyFight coat deck, and an actual meta threat this time. That's quite rare for me. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.